Hello everyone, this is your friend Uzumkai Universe 2.0 and we are back in new fanfic. What if Naruto died after defeating Kaguya and reawakened in Fairy Tail with Kurama? Part 2. Kaguya Cathedral Cemetery. 2 days passed since Naruto joined Fairy Tail, but the air today was far more somber. Gathered in the Kaguya Cathedral's graveyard, the entirety of Fairy Tail's wizards came together in mourning. Lined up in rows, the wizards had all worn black for the occasion in order to pay their respects to both the deceased and her siblings. The skies were darkened with murky, gray clouds that overwhelmed the clear sky in its entirety while silent doldrums settled around the cemetery, killing off all traces of the wind. As if the sky was mourning the loss of one of its most beloved inhabitants, the rain trickled down the headstone like tear accompanied by the millions of raindrops that were shed onto the earth below, completing the visage of sorrow. A cold, biting air surrounded the loved ones gathered as they looked on at the epitaph. Here lies Lizanna Strauss, beloved sister and friend to Animal Souls X768X782. The stone wasn't extravagant or gaudy, no, if anything it was perfect. Its design was a simple marble surface, yet it held an imperceptible elegance. It was a magnificent final tribute to Lizanna's memory. The service lasted 2 hours, but no one would have cared if it lasted all day. Some had brought umbrellas expecting rain and used them while others couldn't find it in themselves to give a damn about getting wet. Naruto stood towards the back of the group holding an umbrella of its own. The black color matched well with the black suit, tie, and dress pants that he wore over a white undershirt. He was rather grateful that the mages in Fairy Tail were generous considering his only set of clothes consisted of what he had when he arrived. Gray had loaned him the suit stating that it was one of the nicer spares that he always kept. Looking around, the blonde observed and carefully studied each guest. One of the groups that he hadn't seen before stood near the back along with him. The unmistakable leader of the four had striking yellow hair like his own, but that was the only similarity. A lightning bolt-shaped scar went over his right eye while his body's stature was much bulkier in comparison to the shinobi's. Judging by the way they carried themselves, the 2 men and woman behind him were his teammates or followers. One had long, distinctive green hair and his looks alone gave him an appearance only gifted to that of nobility. If the Jinchuriki had to describe the second male, he would have to describe him as unique. The dark, blue-haired mage had a stick figure tattoo going over his face while his hair had been slicked back for the occasion. Anatomy. The third member's, the woman, most distinctive features included the glasses that sat on the bridge of her nose while her tan-colored hair was tied outwardly to the side. Just like the rest of the group, the leader was dressed in a black suit, white undershirt, and black tie. Even if they gave off the feeling that they weren't very close to the rest of their guild, their feelings of regret and sympathy were genuine. Deciding to ignore the group, his eyes refocused on the others close by. Natsu stood towards the front of the group along with Urza and Gray. Natsu's disposition emitted a taciturn strength as he held a weeping Happy in his arms. His honest and straightforward eyes never left Lizanna's name even as he tried to soothe his friend. Although his heart greatly ached, the shinobi took solace in the fact that the infamous pair would undoubtedly move past this. A small smile crossed his lips seeing Urza comfort the boy in a sisterly manner while Gray did the same. Standing closest to Lizanna's memorial, Mirajan and Elfman grieved over the loss of their sister while Makarov remained close by choosing to stand behind the two. The area around the old man's eyes were red indicating that he had mourned recently as well. Despite possessing a stature only a few inches taller than a toad, Makarov's atmosphere radiated with both unwavering resolve and unbreakable pride. You're regressing. Naruto's smile turned into one of melancholy regret as his gaze shifted towards the drops of water that fell from the tip of his umbrella's edges. The voice within his mind belonging to his nine-tailed companion. A little bit, he inwardly replied to his partner, watching as a lone raindrop fell to the ground. The Jinchuriki was never a fan of funerals. He remembered the first one being Sarutobi Hiruzen's, which was later followed by his son Osama's. Jiraiya came not long after, but he was thankful it ended there. A word like depressing couldn't possibly ever hope to describe the atmosphere of funerals. The pain, the misery, the regret, the blame, the never-ending chain of thoughts like, "I could have prevented this," were always parts of the process. The blonde could hear Kurama's aged sigh from the inner confines of his mind. You can't expect yourself to live up to everyone's expectations, even if those expectations haven't even been developed. The fox settled into a more comfortable position, using his arms as a makeshift pillow to rest his chin upon. He closed his heavy eyelids while he yawned tiredly. Whenever you meet new people, you always end up sacrificing your own happiness and well-being to protect theirs. A lone crimson eye opened, reflecting centuries of experience. You're doing the same thing as last time. You should be more concerned about yourself. At Kurama's words, a wry grin etched itself onto his well-defined features. Gaze scanning over the friends that he had made so far. If I ever get to that point, I know I'll be able to rely on these people to bring me back. Kurama's gravely chuckles reached the shinobi's ears. Still a stubborn brat as always. The conversation between the strongest remnants of chakra ended with the sound of wet footsteps exiting the cemetery. The shinobi's ocean blue eyes drifted towards the exit where an older man with slicked back blue hair while carrying a sleeping boy around the age of 4 in his arms started to leave. You leaving already, Mikao? Mikao? Naruto would make sure to remember the man's name. Yeah, I don't want Romeo to catch a cold in this weather, Wakaba. The shinobi continued to note that the man with a pompadour was Wakaba, who had nodded before moving to hold his umbrella over the father and son. Slowly but surely, more fairy tale mages began to file out. One by one, two by two, they all left soundlessly, leaving the siblings that had lost a piece of themselves to lament over their sister. Naruto wordlessly watched until Natsu, Urza, and Gray were the last ones to leave, leaving behind Makarov, himself, and the Strauss siblings. Makarov turned away from Mira and Elfman and silently made his way towards Naruto, who had remained towards the back for the duration of the service. The wizened mage stood next to the shinobi, head hung low and eyes closed in thought. So you're a former mercenary, I hear. The blonde's eyebrow quirked itself upwards in curiosity at the sudden inquiry. Urza told you, more or less, but that's not really what I wished to ask you. Makarov evenly answered. Were you serious? Seeing Naruto's expression of slight confusion, the third master decided to elaborate. Were you serious about your decision to help Mira? Ah, so that's what this was about. Naruto gave Makarov a reassuring smile as well. I never go back on my word. For a brief moment, Makarov saw the image of countless people standing behind the newcomer. Numerous amounts of men, women, and kids of all ages smiling just as brightly as he, expressing their unyielding support as if to demonstrate his mettle. The old wizard tiredly smiled in resignation before continuing to walk forward towards the exit of the cemetery. Then, I'll leave her in your hands. Over towards Lizana's grave, Elfman stood next to his older sister, who was kneeling on the wet cobblestone. His typically tall and proud disposition was now hunched slightly forward, as if his spine couldn't find the strength to uphold the rest of his body. After getting a check-up from the guild's reclusive doctor, Perliuzica, his head was wrapped in a bandage with a remedy that would soothe the aching in his head. Mira, we should head back. Not yet. Her voice was so soft that Elfman had barely heard it over the sound of the rain. Her left arm was now elevated by a proper cast prepared by Perliuzica. Knowing that her injury was also a result of his actions twisted a hard knot in his gut. Elfman quietly nodded in acquiescence, knowing that she wanted a few moments to herself. The second sibling turned around at the sound of footsteps that nearly blended itself with the light thrums of rain. His dreary countenance reflected surprise upon meeting the owner. Naruto. The shinobi nodded, a sympathetic tone present in his ocean blue orbs. They drifted over towards the snow-haired teen that had kept to herself. Don't worry, I'll make sure she gets home safely. Elfman followed his gaze. A part of him wished to reject his offer, believing that he had already done more than enough for someone they had just met. That part of him was immediately quelled upon seeing the sheer sincerity glimmering in the most vivid cerulean pair of orbs he had ever seen. He wordlessly nodded and started to walk past the blonde before he was suddenly stopped. Elfman. He looked over his shoulder, meeting the newcomer's small smile. Natsu made Lizana a grave by their first home. I'm sure he'd be happy if you went to see her there too. Elfman bit the bottom of his lip, eyes stinging with a warm and moist feeling as he held onto his composure like it was a lifeline. Yeah, I'll make sure to. He strainedly rasped, his fists clenched tightly in an effort to keep himself from breaking down. The gentle giant soundlessly left as the only sounds he made came from his shoes squishing against the wet cobble. As he watched the beast mages departing back, Naruto turned around to see the rain endlessly pour itself down upon Mirajan. The girl didn't even bother putting on the hood of her black coat. From Mirajan's position on the ground, she had thought Elfman had already left after she had requested him to do so, leaving her as the last one in the cemetery. The mage had remained completely oblivious to the proceedings behind her due to having her attention focused on the last remnant of her sister. She didn't expect another umbrella to move cover and shield her from the rain. I'm going to take you back home, okay? Her eyes slightly widened upon realizing the voice didn't belong to her brother. For the first time since the service, she lifted her head to look behind her, seeing the last person she ever expected to see. Yuto. Is that you? Initially believing herself to be hallucinating, the blonde's comforting smile and hand on her shoulder was firm proof that he wouldn't be leaving her anytime soon. I'm really here. I'm going to take you home, okay? Regaining her senses, Mirajan fervently shook her head and lowered her gaze. And no, not yet. I'm going to stay for a little longer. Naruto sighed good-naturedly and clasped onto her shoulder, earning her attention. If I let you stay, you'd be here all night. Your clothes are wet and you're only going to get yourself sick, you know. Mirajan was going to deny Naruto's request but stopped after finally noticing his disposition. He wasn't asking her. No, he was pleading her. His ocean blue orbs were laced with concern and worry while the corners of his lips shook slightly, showing just how much he was trying to maintain a reassuring smile. She downcastedly lowered her head, accepting the hand that pulled her back to her feet. She felt herself stumble as soon as she stood up, a sign that her legs had gone numb after kneeling in front of her sister's grave for hours. Before she could fall to the ground, she was quickly caught by a pair of sturdy arms that held her close. It's okay. I've got you. She couldn't meet his gaze yet felt Naruto's left arm wrap itself around her waist while he allowed her right arm to be wrapped over his neck. His left arm that went around her waist was careful not to put any pressure on her fractured arm and held her securely while his right hand held the umbrella firm, making sure to keep her as dry as possible. Holding on to young woman, Naruto started to walk forward alongside Mirajan. The way she moved resembled that of a puppet, without a mind or a soul. Her body moved on its own as if being guided by invisible strings attached to her hands and legs. The shinobi matched each step he took with one that Mirajan took as her mind had automatically began to retrace her usual route home. The pair moved past the cemetery gates, surrounded by the melancholy and silent world of rain around them. The quiet sounds of their footsteps pressing against the wet pathway were the only sounds as they moved past the empty shopping districts and street markets. There was not a single soul in sight besides the two fairy tale members. Naruto's cerulean eyes eventually looked down to see that Myra's gaze wasn't even focused on the path in front of her. Rather, they had been directed towards the right. Following her line of sight, Naruto's crescent blue orbs drifted towards Magnolia's famous canal system as he watched millions of raindrops create ripples in the water. Some ripples were large while others were small. Others constantly impacted the same spot while others periodically altered their course. The water continuously melded its appearance to various shapes and forms, yet it didn't change the fact that it was a mesmerizing spectacle to behold. The two stayed like this for the rest of the way. Miragen, whose legs would move on their own after having walked the same way home for years, while Naruto followed each of her moves without a single misstep. The calm, tranquil atmosphere that encompassed the pair like an intangible blanket had brought a warm air of comfort for Miragen that she had not experienced for what felt like months. Her heavy-hearted eyes that carried so much heartbreak managed to tear itself away from the river before refocusing on the man next to her. Even as he managed to guide her while simultaneously matching her stride, the steady grip he had around her waist and hand did not waver in the slightest. His eyes that seemed like the brightest blue that she had ever seen seemed unreadable. She couldn't garner any hints or clues as to what he could possibly be thinking about. Her thoughts came to an end upon noticing that she now stood in front of her home. Naruto had stopped walking as well after following Miragen's line of sight that fell onto a specific home. "Can you stand on your own?" Miragen mutely nodded as Naruto slowly released her from his hold. If it were any other day, she would have grinned in amusement when the blonde's hands hesitantly let her go as if they were afraid she'd crumple without them, and both were already prepared to catch her should she fall. As she walked towards the front steps of her home, she was accompanied each step of the way by the whiskered teen who continued to hold the umbrella over her alone, not paying any mind to the growing wet spots on his shoulders. Miragen twisted the knob on her door and opened it. She turned to meet Naruto's watchful gaze, his eyes never once leaving her observant stare. She found it rather strange. The yellow-haired, blue-eyed youth that she had only met a few days ago somehow had a unique presence. As if he had always been here, right beside her to keep her safe. His kind, honest personality was something that she had never quite seen before, as it was different from the kinds that both Makarov and Natsu possessed. From Naruto's perspective, his eyes scanned over each nearly imperceptible motion that Miragen made. From the slight shivering of Myra's hands that he had tried his best to soothe when he held her to the almost mechanical gait that she walked with, Naruto's eyes studied her carefully, cerulean eyes fixated on discerning her well-being. Despite how heartbroken she appeared, she possessed an unmentioned air of grace. Her resplendent, clear skin and magnificent snow-colored hair seemed to glimmer with the radiance of a white flower in its dreary, gray surroundings. He would be lying if he said she didn't look breathtaking. For the first time that day, Mira smiled. It wasn't one that could be considered sizable or noticeable, but it was there. As small as it was, it spoke volumes of her appreciation. "Thank you." If it were anyone else, they may have not heard a tiny murmur of thanks that was akin to that of a whisper in the wind. The shinobi waved his hand in a disregarding manner with a smile of his own. "It really wasn't much, but just please get some rest." He watched as the young woman gave one last glance before disappearing behind the door that slowly creaked shut. The shinobi stood in front of the door for a few seconds longer before turning around on his heel to head back to his temporary place of residence. "Guess I'll see ya tomorrow." The next day, Monday morning's first rays of sunlight pierced through the pale, translucent curtains adorning the windows of Miragen's room. The dark, mahogany floorboards were illuminated in various places like a spotlight on a stage by the sun's rays, while sounds of its occupants' soft breathing drifted out around the room. Miragen blearily opened her eyes, sitting up while yawning into the back of her hand. Her hands fell onto the smooth sheets of her bed, which acted as a second layer over her white nightgown as her eyes wandered around her room. Her eyes didn't linger long on the pictures of her siblings lined up on her desk in frames and instead chose to clearly see just how lonely her room was. Part of her believed that the funeral yesterday was just a bad dream, but the heaviness in her muscles and the feeling that came after crying denied that possibility. Lizanna was really gone. Shaking her head while trying to avoid thinking about things that would only hurt, she tried to shift her attention elsewhere. Outside her window, she could hear the early birds chirp as they flew past, along with the chatter of the few pedestrians who had jobs to go to before noon. Tap. Mirajan blinked at the strange and abrupt sound. There was a pause, and just as she intended to chalk it up as a figment of her imagination, she heard the same noise yet again. Tap. Her sapphire blue eyes wandered over towards the source, her window. This time, she was able to see a third pebble bounce off the pane of her window. Swinging her legs over the side of her bed, Mirajan walked towards her window and pushed aside the curtain to allowing enough room for a small peek. Looking down, she was greeted to the sight of Fairy Tale's newest edition standing outside her home with a bright smile, holding a large sign that said, "Help needed. Urgent." Her face was expressionless as Mira sighed and released the curtain before climbing back into bed. She pulled the covers back over while turning her head away from the window. Tap. Her eyes wearily opened as she grabbed her pillow and stuffed her head beneath it, hoping to block out the sound. Maybe if she didn't answer, he'd believe she was still asleep. Tap tap. Needless to say, it didn't work. A look of annoyance crossed her countenance as Mirajan climbed out of bed and peeked through the curtains once more. Her scowl grew more noticeable upon noticing that the Uzumaki had apparently prepared another message on the other side of the sign. "I saw you peek through the window, you know," it read. Mirajan unlatched the locks on her window before pushing the two open. The blonde's grin grew after successfully drawing out Mira, as he seemed all too cheerful at this time of day. "Good morning." The eldest Strauss felt the slight chill of the morning and held onto the upper sections of her arms with her hands. She felt less pain when kept silent, as it kept her emotions bottled up inside. "Is there something you need?" Her voice was quiet and hoarse, but if Naruto noticed, then he didn't really care. The shinobi blinked at the fact that he did not receive a "good morning" in return before shrugging it off. He could easily tell that she was annoyed, but as far as he was concerned, it was better than being depressed. He flipped the sign around so that the first message was visible once more. "As you can see, I'd like your help." He sheepishly chuckled. "I'm sorry, but isn't there anyone else you can ask? I'm not feeling very well today. The old man's pretty busy. Natsu and Happy took a job early this morning, and the same goes for Urza and Gray." Naruto replied, counting off each person with his hand. Mirajan sighed once more, knowing that the whiskered newcomer had a valid reason for coming here, but she still was going to decline. "I'm sorry, Naruto, but I'm not in the mood, so please leave." "Yeah, I don't think I can take no for an answer." Naruto nervously grinned, scratching the back of his head. "It's kinda important." The snow-haired beauty's eye twitched slightly. Dark bags beneath her eyes practically held the top of her eyelid to the bottom, while she still couldn't find it in herself to go outside. The buildings and corners that she would see would only remind her of the daily trek to the Guildhall that she and her siblings always took together. "I'm sorry, but the answer's still going to be no." She apologetically smiled. Naruto's own grin faltered slightly, seeing just how pained her smile was, but he wasn't going to give up either. At Mirajan's declination, the blonde mischief maker simply held up a sizable pile of pebbles, wearing an innocent smile the entire time. "People call me persuasive." Mirajan never wanted to be able to mute her surroundings more than she did now. Her hair and face were a mess, and put bluntly, she felt like complete crap. She considered trying to ignore the shinobi's attempts at disturbing her sleep and solitude before deciding it would just be easier to help him and go home. She simply closed her windows shut, effectively blocking out the slightly estranged blonde from sight. Naruto stared at the closed window, silently contemplating whether to start chucking pebbles again or to wait patiently. Deciding on the latter, the shinobi sat on the edge of the pathway with his feet hanging over the town's canal while he simultaneously dumped his stack of pebbles into the water. He waited for roughly 5 minutes when he heard the sound of a door opening behind him. Turning around, he saw that Mira had changed out of her white sleeping gown into a plain t-shirt and a pair of sweats. Her left arm was still being held within a cast slung over her shoulder while her hair, like the day before, had been left to hang freely with strands falling past her temples and covering her forehead. Looking down at his own clothing comprised of a red flak jacket and a pair of black nylon pants, he noticed that he looked out of place in comparison to Earthland's standards for fashion. Note to self. Remind me to buy some clothes when I have money. Ignoring his audible mental note, Mirajan directed her hollow stare towards the blonde. To the Jinchuriki, her eyes resembled that of a dead fish, lifeless, empty, and devoid of emotion. His fist subconsciously tightened, but the takeover mage didn't notice. What did you need my help for? Ah, right. Naruto began digging through his jacket and pants pockets in search of something. His expression lit up when he pulled out a crumpled piece of paper that he handed to her. With a raised brow, Mirajan uncrumpled the paper, reading its contents aloud. Plans for space-time jutsu. Need to find a secluded area first so I don't blow up the entire toe. Okay. Wrong piece of paper. That one's on me. Naruto suddenly spoke up, snatching the paper out of her grip while she confusedly stared at the teen. She was promptly handed a new piece of paper that was practically identical in terms of material and pigment. Items needed from the market: tomatoes, carrots, potatoes, fresh chicken, onions, freshly prepared chicken. Mirajan's eyes wandered further and further down the list, looking for anything out of the ordinary before she directed an unimpressed stare towards the unperturbed shinobi. This is a grocery list. MMHMM. And you came to me completely unannounced, holding a sign that said, urgent, help, because you needed help shopping for groceries. The newcomer's nonchalant nod didn't help his disposition in the slightest. Yep. The place where I'm staying at needed me to go buy some food and I didn't want to be a freeloader, so here I am. A sudden realization hit Mirajan after hearing Naruto's brief explanation. Where was the blonde even staying? As far as she knew, he didn't have any family or friends in Magnolia. She shook her head, clearing her thoughts. It's not like she cared or that it mattered really. I know a couple of places we can go to close by. Mira started to walk towards the edge of the street before Naruto suddenly called out to her. Hey, Mirajan. She glanced over her shoulder to see the blue-eyed boy that was lagging slightly behind. His finger scratched the side of his cheek, his persona appearing slightly bashful. Thanks. You really helped me out here. Although she had only known him for a little over 3 days, there was something about Naruto's character that stuck out to Mirajan. The Uzumaki passed himself off as someone with strong morals and a straightforward personality that seemed to pull the people around him closer. He neither seemed like the type of person to take advantage of someone's kindness or make high-maintenance requests. Rather, his requests somehow made others want to fulfill them. Forced as it was, her faint smile served as more than a significant answer. Magnolia's shopping district. Although the week had just began, the farmers' market stalls introduced various fresh produce brought from the different towns of the continent. The shouts of entrepreneurs echoed and overlapped with one another, all declaring just how great their prices and products were. Get your fresh loaves of honey bread here. 100 jewels per loaf. Basil Town's finest tomatoes over here. Freshest ones you'll find in Fiore. Walking side by side, Fairy Tail's newest member and senior S-class mage maintained a brisk pace through the crowded street. While Mirajan remained impervious to the bombardment of offers and deals, Naruto, on the other hand, was not so tactful. Young man, you absolute must try these Barley Town apples. Have a sample. Oh wow, this is really good. How much are they? They're only 300 jewels per pound. Great. I'll take foe. Gah. Standing beside Naruto with his cheek pinched between her fingers, Miragen shifted her hollow stare towards the merchant who backed away almost immediately. Sorry, but we're not interested. Isn't that right, Naruto? The shinobi's cerulean orbs glanced to his side before he nervously laughed in response. Yaoya White. Can you please let go of my cheek now? Miragen complied and released the Uzumaki's cheek before choosing to grab the sleeve of his shirt instead. It's like you're trying to make this harder than it needs to be. She blandly stated as she pulled him through the crowd. Do you even have enough money to spend on anything that's not on the list you showed me? Who knows? The ninja grinned. I only have what the old man gave me. The whiskered teen pulled out a sack of coins before handing it to Mira for inspection. The mage opened the parcel, doing a rough inspection before concluding it should be sufficient for what they were looking for. I'll hold on to this so you don't get distracted by any of the other merchants here. The blonde nodded, giving his approval before stuffing his hands in his pockets while following closely behind her. Finding the first potato stand on the bustling street, the pair's arrival to the stand was noticed by its boisterous owner. The kind elderly woman gave a polite smile and waved before moving to tend to other customers swarming her stand. The list says a dozen, so grab a 12 and let's move on. The shinobi's eyes monitored her facial expression carefully as it shifted back into its blank state. A mischievous grin spread across his lips as a new idea came to mind. Okay, leave it to me. Naruto energetically responded, grabbing one of the shopping bags provided by the merchant. He then went to work finding his 12 potatoes. Miragen stood a good distance away, arms crossed and eyes closed in thought. She had finally gotten a momentary period of peace, no matter how short it was. Honestly, there had to be a limit to how helpless someone was when it came to shopping. Wow, look at all the food they're selling, Mira. Do you think we should buy something for Elfman? Miragen's lips fell into tight-lipped frown while her left hand clenched itself tightly within its cast. Memories of her first trip here with her little sister resurfaced as her eyes traveled around the numerous stalls and people. The merchants and their products hadn't really changed over the years. Looking beside her to where another person usually accompanied her, she found the spot empty. Hey, Miragen, check these out. Before her thoughts could darken any further, she was brought out of their inner reflection upon being greeted face to face with the boy who seemed like a representation of the sun in terms of brightness. Her attention was drawn towards the sizable pile of potatoes he held cradled in his arms before her eyes promptly shifted into an expression that was a mix of unamusement and disbelief. Naruto. She began as she grabbed one potato from his pile. Yes. Please tell me how in the actual world you managed to pick the worst potatoes out of all of those. If the potato is green and soft. She demonstrated her point by squeezing the vegetable to the point her fingers made a temporary, yet visible indent. That means it wasn't grown properly and that it will probably taste bitter. The vegetables they sell here are usually always fresh, so again, how did you even manage to find 12 of these? Naruto innocently blinked at Miragen's incredulity before looking down at the potatoes he had chosen. I just found them and thought they looked pretty good. Miragen sighed before leading Naruto back to the stall where she immediately made him place the potatoes back onto the racks holding them. Quickly and efficiently scanning over the selection, Mira's experienced eyes managed to pick out a dozen golden, brown potatoes that possessed a significantly more natural appearance than what Naruto had picked out. Grabbing each potato one by one before placing it into the bag, they handed the old lady a few coins before giving the bag of potatoes back to Naruto. She internally sighed, hoping to get the shopping trip over and done with. Somewhere in Magnolia, 2 hours had passed since they arrived to the farmer's market before the two fairy tale wizards, or rather wizard and shinobi, finally finished. It was now late in the afternoon with both of the teens walking back to wherever Naruto was leading them to. Man, I'm really grateful you were there to help me out. Speaking of which, The blonde in question had a positively bright smile on his whiskered features even as he carried 3 grocery bags in each hand filled to the brim with vegetables while one had meat. You really don't go shopping at markets, do you? What makes you say that? When we went to shop for carrots, you picked the slimiest and squishiest carrots out of the entire bunch. When we went to pick out the onions, you picked out the ones that were practically falling apart. And to top it all off, you managed to find 9 of each one in a fresh market. Haha, I am pretty skilled, aren't I? Naruto grinned at Miragen's look of doubt. The snow-haired mage sighed and pinched the bridge of her nose. You have everything now, don't you? I'll see you around. As she turned around to leave, she was suddenly stopped when a hand clasped onto her shoulder. She glanced around to see 2 cerulean blue eyes and a small smile being directed towards her. The place I'm heading to is that building over there, Naruto said, pointing to an area that lied just behind a wall. Can you come with me for a bit? Miragen sighed in response before speaking. Naruto, it'll only be for a bit, and if you don't want to stay then you can leave. She just wanted to be alone. Mira lowered her crestfallen gaze to the ground, her eyes covered by the strands of her hair. She didn't want to talk to anyone. She didn't want to be near anyone. All she wanted was to be alone, safe within the confines of her room. Every street, every building, and every person she saw around town only served to remind her of her sister, and with every reminder came a painful stab of pain in her chest. The 3 of them, Elfman, Lizanna, and herself, had come to this town together. Growing up without parents had always been a rough experience, but they had gotten through it with the support of each other. Eventually, Magnolia had finally become a home to them, while the people at Fairy Tail had become their family. Now with Lizanna gone, it was as if a large hole had been torn open in her heart. Looking at her broken arm, Mira doubted she could go on jobs even if her arm healed. With each passing day, she could feel her magic slipping away, as if it were water pouring out of a leak in a tank. Ira Jane. She lightly gasped, realizing that she had been completely oblivious to Naruto repeatedly calling out her name. She turned around and saw the eccentric teen take on a look of worry. Hey, are you okay? Why, yeah, I'm fine. Mira answered as she shrugged off Naruto's hand on her shoulder. Sorry, I just had something on my mind. The shinobi's troubled stare made it blatantly clear that he didn't believe her. In an attempt to ease his suspicions, the ivory-haired takeover mage sought to change the subject. Oh, yeah, didn't you say the place we were heading to is just around the corner? Although his hands were both holding a handful of groceries, the Jinchuriki crossed his arms over his chest, a hint of concern lacing the corners of his eyes. Are you sure? Seeing her hastily nod in the affirmative, the reincarnation of Asura led her to the entrance to the area behind the wall. Looking over the wall, the Strauss sisters' expression turned into that of surprise upon recognizing the building as a local church. The church was surrounded by a grayish stone wall that appeared to have been cleaned recently. Engraved over its iron-barred gates was a cross matching the sculpted version that had been placed on the church's roof. The building itself looked aged in comparison to the newer structures in Magnolia, yet it still maintained an image of fortitude and endurance. I'm back, Naruto called out as he kicked open the gates before letting himself inside. As Miragen followed behind him, the 2 of them were greeted by an elderly priest dressed in rather colorful garments along with tall papal hat. The man emitted an aura of warmth and generosity as he chuckled heartily at the youth's eccentric entrance. Welcome back, Naruto. I trust that you were able to buy the ingredients for tonight. Upon entering, Myra's gaze had wandered around and observed its surroundings. From the dusty ground to the patches of grass, the church possessed a rarely found tranquil atmosphere. The shinobi apologetically grinned, holding up the bags of groceries. To be honest, I would have had a little trouble without Miragen's help here. Father Brock's sincerity-filled eyes shifted towards Mira as the man lowered his head in thanks. You have my thanks as well, young one. Ah, it really wasn't much. Mirajan immediately responded, waving her hands for emphasis. At that moment, Myra's attention was drawn towards the sight of a new arrival who emerged from the inside of the church. The familiar head of striking blonde hair and ocean blue eyes were too similar to mistaken for anyone else. Oh, you're finally back. The new arrival spoke as Mirajan's eyes slowly widened. She blinked once. She blinked twice. She even closed and rubbed her eyes for good measure as she looked to the blonde standing next to her and what seemed like his identical twin in front of them. Knowing the exact feeling Mirajan was experiencing, Brock chuckled in mirth while the two Narutos observed a frenzied Mira with barely concealed amusement. How? What? Why? I mean, how are there two of you? Hey, boss, where should I put these? The newly revealed clone holding the groceries asked, while presently ignoring Mirajan's mindblown state. The original Naruto that had been in the church for the entirety of the day took the vegetables from his copy's hands before directing his head towards the complex's courtyard. For now, can you go help the others with the kids? I'll go set up in the kitchen. You got it. As the clone ran off to find his fellow brethren, Father Brock spun back around to head back into the church. I'm going to check up on how your other selves are progressing with the repairs. Once again, thank you for your help. Nah, don't mention it. I wouldn't have a place to stay if it weren't for you, old man. The partner of the Kyuubi waved goodbye to the priest before finally turning to address a shell-shocked Mirajan. The girl's jaw was slightly dropped while her eyes were wide with shock. A few strands of her hair seemed to be sticking out, perfectly defining just how flustered she was. Motioning for her to come closer, his trademark grin didn't seem bothered by how unnerved she was after seeing just one of his clones. He didn't blame her really. Although the technique wasn't commonly used in the elemental nations, its reputation had been so vast and widespread that there wasn't a single shinobi who didn't know of it. On the other hand, after asking Father Brock about any similar magic, the closest thing that existed to the shadow clone technique in this world was something called a thought projection, and even then it was extraordinarily limited in application. Come on in. I could use the extra help. The Jinchuriki spoke, garnering Mirajan's attention. Returning back to Earthland, the ivory-haired woman finally regained her sense of speech, managing to articulate just how confused she was. Hold it, are you not going to explain what the hell that was? Watching her wildly gesture towards the direction his clone headed off to, the shinobi chuckled before leaning his back against the door frame. I don't mind answering some questions as long as you help me make some food for these kids. I could always use a fourth set of hands. Fourth, Mira confusedly repeated. Help first then questions later. Albeit reluctantly, the eldest Strauss nodded, agreeing to the whiskered boy's terms and followed him inside. Upon entering through the main door, Mirajan's facial expression immediately changed to one of surprise, seeing 5 other clones interacting alongside at least a dozen children with ages varying from 6 to 12. After turning around the corner and entering an opening within the stone and plaster wall, Mira found a courtyard on the left side of the church's building. It was a wide and open space with a couple trees strewn about, yet with children everywhere. Performing a rough headcount, the S-class wizard found at least one clone accompanying each group of 3 kids. The multiple copies played games like freeze tag and hide and seek with the younger kids, joyful laughter melodiously resounding along with the sight like a symphony. Even she couldn't stop the small smile that spread across her lips at the sight. Standing on the church's roof, another set of 5 clones were shouting out orders to one another as they took apart old, moldy boards from the roof before replacing them fresh new ones. I didn't know you were so devoted to the church here. Mirajan's sweat dropped watching the clones work with flair and vigor. Oh, I'm not a member of the church. Naruto paused to let that sink in right before Mirajan's gaze snapped towards Naruto almost immediately. Come again. She spoke in disbelief. Naruto sheepishly laughed while scratching the side of his cheek with his left index finger. I was actually wandering around town when the old man here saw me and decided to let me stay for the night. I noticed that a lot of parts here were starting to wear out, so I made an agreement to help out around here in exchange for a place to sleep. Arriving to their destination, Naruto stepped through the door into a building next to the courtyard with Miragen in tow. The building was a large kitchen with a rectangular table in the center, while the surrounding areas had ovens, stoves, and various kitchen utensils lining the walls. I'm Ba. Oof. Almost immediately after they entered, Miragen had to step to the side to avoid Naruto from toppling over her. Standing safely to the side, Miragen found the reason for the blonde's fall lying on top of said blonde. Yay, you're back. Lying down on top of his chest was a small girl who appeared to be no older than 11, with dark brown hair tied over her shoulder in a single ponytail and bright violet eyes. Geez, Hina, stop tackling Naruto when you see him. A male voice chided. Joining the group was a boy with coral pink hair, sharp yellow eyes, and a pair of glasses. He appeared to be at least 1 year older than his friend, yet maintained an air of maturity in contrast. But this one's the real one, Ko. The boy sighed out of a sense of resignation before he noticed an unfamiliar face. Who are you? With 2 pairs of eyes on Miragen, the shinobi on the ground decided to speak up for her. Miragen, meet my 2 helpers. The overly responsible stick in the mud over there is Kojiro Shinomiya. He usually handles the cooking and preparations for Old Man Brock. Ignoring Kojira's annoyed glare, the Uzumaki carried on with the introductions as he looked down on the girl who was currently nuzzling her face into his shirt. He sighed before he pulled both of her face's cheeks, lifting it up to face his. Gah. And the little troublemaker right here is Hanako Inui. She's his assistant chef. I don't quouse tuable. Naruto and Kojira's simultaneous disbelieving stares proved her argument otherwise. Most of the time, releasing her cheeks, Naruto sighed and ruffled her hair playfully, Hanako enjoying the gesture immensely. You're lucky you're endearing, you know. When Hanako was going to respond, she suddenly stopped, noticing the presence of an attractive lady in the room, and effectively clammed up. Anyway, these 2 have apparently been cooking for the orphanage since they got here, so I think they'll be able to handle the work. Kojiro crossed his arms over his chest while adjusting his glasses so that they sat on the bridge of his nose. If anything, I'm more worried that this vagrant's going to mess something up, he stated, fully directing his comment towards Naruto. The ninja simply grinned as he lifted a petulantly sulking Hanako off of him. Anyway, I know you 3 will get along, so let's get started. Oi, can you really not cook? Kojiro shouted. Kojiro groaned and sighed, muttering something about a freeloading hobo before holding his hand out towards Mira. Nice to meet you, Miragen. You can call me Kojiro. Clasping the hand, the snow-haired beauty shook hands with intelligent youth. Likewise, and just Mira is fine. Kojiro nodded before crossing his arms over his chest while directing a bland glare towards the girl who currently standing awestruck in front of Mira. Hanako, do I need to remind you that it's rude not to introduce yourself, and it's even more rude to stare at guests? True to his words, Hanako was indeed staring at no one other than Miragen. Violet eyes bore onto Sapphire as tiny hands reached out and balled themselves tightly while her grip on Naruto's shirt tightened. Hey, Naruto, she called out, still staring at a slightly perturbed Miragen. The blonde poked Hanako's cheek yet did not earn a response in the slightest. Somewhat unsettled as well, he responded with a hint of hesitation in his tone. Yes. Hanako's head whirled towards Naruto while literal stars flashed in her eyes. That lady's super pretty. Is she your girlfriend, Kya? Before she could finish her question, she was promptly flicked on the forehead by the whiskered world traveler who lifted her off of himself. Hina. Naruto began in a manner similar to a scolding parent. Don't be rude and introduce yourself properly. Seeing the unyielding stare directed towards her, Hanako bowed out and conceded. She looked towards and entertained Miragen before lowering her head in apology. Hanako Anui. That's better, Naruto said as he dusted himself off. He picked up the groceries he had set down prior to being tackled and moved them to the large island table in the center of the kitchen. Alright, Kojiro and Hina, can you guys take care of the onions and carrots? Yep. Leave it to us, Hanako confidently answered, flashing Naruto a grin and thumbs up. Naruto's expectant gaze shifted towards Kojiro, who nodded readily. And I'll make sure she doesn't blow up the kitchen and us with it. Expression utterly serious, Naruto gave Kojiro a thumbs up as well. Yosh, I leave it to you, Kojiro. You guys are so mean. Kojiro chuckled before pushing Hina along towards the second sink in the kitchen while carrying the bags of carrots and onions with him. Yeah, let's go, Hina. And make sure you guys wash your hands. Naruto called out as they left. And what will our job be? Miragen asked while sliding a hair tie off of her wrist. She used the band to tie her hair up in a ponytail behind her head as a precaution to avoid any accidents in the kitchen. Hefting the large sack of potatoes onto the counter, Naruto began to put them into a large collective bowl. Our job will be washing and skinning the potatoes, he answered before moving to the sink and washing his hands. Looking at the ingredients on the table, I'm guessing we're going to be making curry rice for the kids. Miragen asked as she followed after Naruto to wash her own hands. Yep. I'm not exactly a great cook, but I won't let you beat me. Naruto challengingly grinned. As Miragen picked up the skinner and held it in her hand, a particular fragment of a memory resurfaced in her mind. I challenge you to a cooking showdown, Mirane. Miragen softly smiled before grabbing the first potato to start. Just watch me. A couple hours later. It's so good. Thank you, Naruto. Seconds please. After finishing the cooking, Naruto's clones had used some of the spare wood from roof reparations to build a large picnic table that managed to fit at least 10 people on each side. Each row was packed with children, all eating the homemade meal from small bowls thanks to Naruto, Mira, Kojiro, and Hanako. Father Brock stood by the food table managing servings while making sure each child got to eat. Sitting away from the table, Naruto and Miragen watched with empty bowls sitting in their laps as they sat next to each other while leaning on one of the courtyard's trees. Man, you really know your way around a kitchen, Naruto said with a sigh of satisfaction. It's my loss. Looking over to his left side, he saw Miragen staring into her empty dish, quietly stirring in her own thoughts. If you have any questions you'd like to ask, I'll gladly answer them. A promise is a promise, you know. Resting his hands behind his head, the shinobi relaxed into the almost nostalgic feeling of cool bark pressed against his skin. Miragen's head rose up and looked towards the lackadaisical blonde before recalling her question from earlier in the day. Then, can you tell me how you made those copies of yourself? I've never seen anything like that before. It's called the shadow clone technique. Naruto smiled in reminiscence. And right now it's an ability unique to me alone. You alone? Miragen curiously repeated. What do you mean by that? Calm blue eyes drifting towards the gently flowing leaves, the ninja smiled in amusement, deciding to regale the girl with slightly altered tales of the truth. Well, Miragen, I guess you could say I'm a little bit different than the average mage. The place where I came from had a lot of skills like the ones you guys have here, but there are a lot of different ones as well. I see. Mira quietly murmured after deciding to accept the rather ambiguous response. Also, why do you always call me Miragen? Naruto tilted his head, slightly confused, and adopted an expression curiosity. What do you mean? You always use my full name when no one else does. It would be a lot easier to call me Mira instead. I see. The blonde faintly chuckled. Well then, Mira, Do you have anything else you want to ask? As Mirajan thought about it, there had always been one particular question that had constantly tugged on the edges of her mind. It had come up time and time again whenever she ran into the Uzumaki, yet she could never figure out its answer. Why? It was a single word but with a limitless amount of answers. She had neither yelled the word nor did she mumble it. It was short, clear, and easily heard. Why what? Naruto repeated, slightly unsettled at the sudden and abstruse question. Why are you doing all this? Walking me home, asking me to help you with things like shopping, trying to show me someplace like this. What are you trying to do? There was a hint of anxiousness and desperation laced into her tone, a stark contrast to the Jinchuriki's unchanging and calm demeanor. It's easy really. I'm just fulfilling a promise. Promise? What do you mean by that? Mira asked, caught off guard by the cryptic answer. Whose promise are you fulfilling? She felt a sudden pang of pain within her chest at the thought that he was only doing this out of a sense of obligation, at the very thought that he wouldn't have bothered talking to her if someone hadn't asked him to. Who asked you to do this? The snow-haired woman despondently murmured, eyes covered by the fringe of her hair. Someone who cares about you. The shinobi tenderly smiled. The successor of the sage placed a hand on Mirajan's shoulder. For the young mage, as soon as the blonde's hand made contact, she felt her surroundings completely shift. In one moment she felt the support of the old tree behind her and heard the continuous laughter of the church orphanage's children, and the next everything had changed. The presence of the tree faded away in the blink of an eye as if it never existed. The sounds of the kids and merriment were gone, and in their place settled an eerie silence. Mirajan Strauss was no longer in church's courtyard. She was no longer anywhere near Magnolia, in fact. Standing up while sweeping her gaze over her new surroundings, her eyes widened as the familiarity and significance of the place dawned upon her. The handiwork of the small, straw hut couldn't have been mistaken for anyone else's besides hers. Along with the grave engraved with her name. I once had a friend who I considered to be my brother in everything but blood. Mirajan suddenly stiffened, remembering the person who had somehow in some way brought her here. She turned and watched as the person she previously thought she knew more about than anyone at the guild approached the beautifully made grave and crouched down in front of it. His voice carried over the mountain like a calming wind after a storm, and the tenderness he exhibited could match even the sun with its warmth. He was arrogant, annoying, and a total pain in the neck. Naruto chuckled in remembrance. But he was still the person I considered my best friend. The Uzumaki's eyes gained a tinge of regret and heaviness as the image of his worn and bloody teammate appeared in his mind. However, one day the village gave his older brother a mission that resulted in the deaths of their entire family. The person who I thought was my friend lost himself to his grief and became obsessed with his revenge. He lost his entire family and was swallowed up by his pain, eventually leaving him trapped in the dark. Standing to his full height, he walked towards Mirajan until he was no more than a few steps away. His features, kind and full of life, were face to face with her stunned disposition. I made a promise to myself that I never wanted to see anyone else suffer like he did. And, he looked back at the grave made by Lizanna's closest friend, its splendidly crafted details basking in the warmth of the sun. I also made a promise to Lizanna that I would make sure you didn't give up being a wizard, too. Myra's honest sapphire blue eyes revealed their astonishment as her jaw slightly fell in sheer wonder. You knew about my magic. Haha, I can't take credit for that. Naruto good-naturedly grinned. Urza's the one who noticed. Urza? Mirajan asked with visible bewilderment. Naruto nodded before speaking again. She doesn't want to lose a precious rival and friend. Mirajan bit the bottom of her lip while her right arm moved to cradle her broken left. Her eyes looked lost and dim, refusing to meet his own. I don't want to endanger or get anyone else killed ever again. She quietly muttered, choking back a hiccup. I don't want to be a mage that will only get the people close to her hurt. I know you don't. Miragen inclined her head upwards as two hands placed themselves on her shoulders. Coming face to face with a pair of the most fervent and animated ocean blue eyes, she found herself lost in the face of just how certain the tone of the shinobi's voice was. But I won't let you quit. I may have not been able to meet Lizana, but I know for sure that she wouldn't want her older sister to blame herself and live like this. Tears gathered at the corners of the silver-haired mage's eyes while her hands balled themselves tightly. Her entire frame started to shake as it held itself from falling apart altogether. But Mirane, a recollection from 4 years ago, only a couple days after they had left their village, arose within Miragen's memories. 4 years ago, Mirane, what's wrong? A younger Lizana, bright blue eyes filled with pure curiosity, stood in front of her older sister who was currently sitting on an old stump in the forest they were venturing through. Miragen had hidden herself away in an overly large cloak as if to hide her existence away from the outside world. Beneath the opening in the front of the garment, one demonic right arm rested on her leg. Not receiving a response from her sister, Lizana placed her hands on her while her expression adopted a pouting manner. Take this. Ouch. What the heck, Lizana? Miragen used her right hand to hold her left shoulder that had been the victim of Lizana's pinch. She had been stewing in her own thoughts when, out of the blue, her baby sister decided to pinch her shoulder for no apparent reason. Grinning proudly with a triumphant air about her, Lizana stood tall and proud, well as tall as a kid her age could stand. Don't you see, Mirane? Slightly annoyed, Miragen grumpily directed a small glare towards the little girl. See what? Pointing her small finger directly into her face, Lizana spoke with a voice of pride and liveliness. A monster wouldn't have been fazed by my attack, but you still said, ouch. Her cute sister was practically sparkling with a shining gleam in her eyes, fully believing in the fact that she was right. At the moment, she still had control over her body, but it still didn't reassure her in the slightest. It was only a matter of when, not if, she fully turned into a demon. Miragen lowered her head in self-deprecation, idly touching the scales upon her right hand. She was afraid. That's only for now, Lizana. What if I really do turn into a monster and hurt your elfman? Lizana smiled brightly and held her sister's cheeks with her significantly smaller hands. Mushing together Miragen's face to the point it looked too funny not to laugh, Lizana answered her sister's worries with her most honest answer. Even if you hurt me or elfman, we'll both forgive you. You're our big sister and neither of us want you to give up, so promise. Face still being held by her little sister, Miragen gave Lizana a questioning stare in response. Promise what? Eyes fully serious despite holding Miragen in a rather ridiculous manner, Lizana brought her face even closer so that Miragen could practically see the resolve burning in her eyes. Promise that you won't give up on yourself, no matter what, or else I won't let you go. Sighing audibly, Miragen softly smiled and nodded. She pulled her sister's hands off of her face, so that she could wrap her up in a hug, surprising even Lizana. All right, you win. It's a promise, Lizana. Now, as he held onto her shoulders, all of a sudden Naruto felt the shaking in Miragen's arms and legs cease on its own. Adopting an expression of confusion, his facial features immediately changed into that of unadulterated surprise upon being hugged by Miragen, who wrapped her one good arm around him. Feeling a slight burning in his cheeks, the whiskered shinobi tried his best to make sure that he wasn't aggravating her injury in any way. Hey Mira, what's wrong? Are you okay? Miragen slowly began. Naruto blinked, repeating the same word she had mumbled. If you and Lizana met, I think you two would be good friends. Miragen finished murmuring into his shirt. Releasing the shell-shocked and stunned Naruto, Miragen's gaze matched the Uzumaki's with a newly found hope radiating within it. Hey, what would you have done if I decided to stop being a mage anyway? Naruto scratched the back of his head as he hadn't fully thought out what he would have done if she did say no. Well, I probably would have grabbed my pebbles back from the river and restarted at square one. The Jinchuriki blinked, coming to the realization of what Mirajan's words had meant. Wait, does this mean? Smiling brightly before he could finish his sentence, Mirajan bowed her head in a manner similar to that of a student. It means I'll be in your care. Naruto. Flowing through the dense forest like a blue vein, Magnolia's river was a portrayal of peace and calm. The peaceful sounds of chirping birds and the gentle whispers of the wind flowed through the forest like a river, encompassing the forest and its occupants within an ambience of tranquility. Music and audio. Before it was promptly destroyed by the echoing reverberations of an explosion. The early morning crows screeched as they rapidly scattered away from the source of the eruption. Running across the river flowing through the forest at near impossible speeds, a spiky-haired youth traversed the heavy forest as if it was by second nature. Defying the laws of physics, he ran across the surface of the river at a breakneck pace, passing the muddy, riparian banks and tall cattails growing near them. The almost rhythmic sounds of his footsteps impacting the watery surface with tiny splashes were the only echoes haunting the eerily quiet forest as he jumped over a stone jutting out of the river. His senses screaming out to him, Naruto Uzumaki performed a mid-air flip, dodging an explosive shot of magic that blew apart the area he previously stood, sending splatters of water up into the air. The shot had been so potent that it had left the space temporarily unoccupied, forcing the river to refill the empty patch. She's gotten better, he inwardly mused, the attempted attack not deterring his run in the slightest. Not long after, the shinobi was referring to appeared before him in a matter of seconds. Jet, black bat-like wings sprouted from her upper back while an undulating crocodile tail was moments away from slamming into his face much like a bull. Her hands were covered in scales while her fingers were frighteningly sharp. Mirajan Strauss's long silvery hair jutted upwards, defying gravity, while her typically passive blue eyes glimmered with a purple tint. It's good that you're able to use takeover again, but... Naruto dropped to his knees, sliding across the water's surface while allowing the demonic tail to harmlessly pass by mere inches away from his nose. As soon as he had avoided the ligament, he pushed himself off of his knees and back onto his feet, pivoting on his right foot to turn around. Efficiently wrapping his left arm over her wings, cutting off her means of escape, he solidified his hold by using his right arm to hold a glowing kunai to her throat. You've still got a long way to go before you can beat me. Lesson 1, my faithful student, always watch your back. Naruto's confident grin faded away upon seeing the corners of Mirajan's lips tugged upwards in amusement. I think you should take your own lessons into consideration, sensei. With the slight motion of her index finger alone, a sphere of purple demonic energy that had been left floating above the forest propelled itself directly into the shinobi's back. Mira felt the hold on her wings loosen as she used her wings to blow back her captor the moment her magic collided with the mercenary. Gaining a couple feet in distance away, she carefully regarded the plume of smoke, waiting for it to fade away. As the gray, ashen smoke cleared up, she was met with the sight of the shinobi's unconscious body floating face down on the calm ministrations of the river. Sighing to herself in relief, she undid her takeover, returning to her human appearance. Her training attire consisted of a black tank top and shorts that hugged her shapely body quite well, providing her both with flexibility and movement. Her hair had been tied into an upwards ponytail to keep it from interfering with her training, finishing her appearance. Wading through the opposing river that was knee-high in depth, she reached her teacher and scanned over him warily. Looks like this is my first win. She spoke with a tone of finality. As she reached down to pick up Naruto before he drowned, her elation was short-lived as his body blew up in a cloud of smoke. Eyes widening as the realization hit her like a truck, Miragen didn't have enough time to counter what happened next. Several popping sounds occurred close by until 5 similar clones surrounded her. Not wasting a breath, numerous chains burst from each clone's hands, seizing her hands, ankles, and waist. A fifth Naruto approached from behind her, morphing the chain in his hand into the shape of an ethereal, glowing knife, and held it next to the side of her neck. Of course, I take my own lessons into consideration. I wouldn't be the sensei otherwise, student. If he were to be honest, Naruto couldn't deny that he was having fun. Although he had promised to help her regain her strength, he was having just as much fun messing around in fights like this. Back in the elemental nations, there were never really any chances to fight against his friends in the Konoha 11 or 12 if you included a certain Uchiha. Everyone belonged to different teams that ventured out of the village on missions at completely random times. In fact, injuring someone even by accident could have serious repercussions if they were needed for an important mission. All battles and spars against shinobi posed significant danger that could end someone's life if there was an accident, but in Earthland it was different. Although their techniques and abilities were dangerous, it was practically child's play countering them. He finally understood what Kakashi must have felt like training numerous amounts of genin squads. Defeat was an ambiguous word with a multitude of meanings. It didn't necessarily mean to kill, but at the same time it didn't mean to spare a life either. For the mages of Earthland, the word defeat meant to fight and disable. Killing was strictly forbidden by this world's government according to Miragen, and doing so could result in prison or in worst cases execution. Naruto supposed this was why he was able to treat nearly everyone around him as a non-threat, because back in his former world defeat meant something else. To defeat meant to either kill or leave barely breathing until a target's usefulness had expired. Although it was the former shinobi mentality, he had still been taught the olden ways at the academy before reforms could take over. Of course, he was never one to kill indiscriminately. That didn't change the fact he knew perfectly well that there were some minds that could not be swayed no matter what. Every mage in fairy tale was rather harmless in comparison to him, which made teasing them so damn fun. Miragen sighed, this time with an underlying tone of annoyance. Damn it, fine, you win. Just like that, the chains keeping her tightly bound released her while each clone cheekily waved goodbye before dispersing into thin air. Miragen rubbed her wrists, mindful of the marks left by the chains from tightly constricting her, before directing an unpleased glare towards their owner. How? She blandly asked. I disguised myself as rocks in the river and waited to lure you here, was his swift reply. The blonde had nonchalantly answered her question before walking back towards land. Following behind, Miragen groaned as she pinched the temples upon her forehead as an even bigger headache started to arrive. So I fell for another one of your traps again. Feet now on Earth, the Uzumaki started his trek back to the area they had set up camp in, with the Strauss glaring daggers at his deceptively undefended back. You know, at this point I'm thinking of keeping a score just to see how much I can mess with you in training. The shinobi grinned, placing his hands behind his head. How many times have I beaten you again? I don't remember. Miragen muttered, crossing her arms beneath her chest. Well, I've beaten you at least 100 times. Not even close. It's 9-0. Mira immediately interjected. A shiver traveled up her spine as the blonde glanced over his shoulder with the same damnable teasing glint in his eyes. Spending 1 week training with the insufferable teen allowed her to practically predict what came next. So you did remember. Just because she knew it was coming didn't make it any less irritating. Speeding up, Mira soon left behind a laughing Naruto, a slightly reddened face due to the embarrassment of being so easily baited. Jogging to catch up to her, Naruto good-naturedly wrapped his arm over her shoulder in a friendly manner, with his need for teasing thoroughly satisfied. Anyhow, you've improved a lot since you first started, you know. There it was again, Mira idly noted. She found that the blonde had a habit of saying, you know, quite often. It was kind of similar to how Natsu would always say how fired up he was, except in this case it was slightly less annoying. There was a very small gap between the two. Sighing before shrugging his arm off of her shoulder, she unenthusiastically maintained her trek back to their training area. How do you figure that? I haven't beaten you a single time since we started last week. Simple. Do you know how long our fight lasted? Myra's eyebrow slightly arose at the question before shrugging once more. I don't know, about 45 minutes give or take. Close enough, and do you know how long it was yesterday? Mirajan's features slightly scrunched up in thought before finding answer. About 15 minutes. Do you see a pattern? Mirajan stopped in the middle of the dirt path directing a look that said, "What are you getting at?" Towards Naruto's expectant features before the reason finally dawned upon her. I fought you longer in my takeover today than I did yesterday. Seeing Naruto's fox-like grin indicating she was correct, Mirajan remembered that she had only lost yesterday due to the fact that she couldn't manage to maintain her takeover. Today, however, she was released it of her own volition and she even felt that she could have held onto it even longer. I was hoping to see how long you could hold on to it today, but I didn't attack you soon enough. Naruto sighed in disappointment as he continued to walk while withdrawing a book and pen. You sound way too disappointed. Mira blandly stated as she stared at his departing back while following not too far behind. She noticed that he seemed to be drawing something in his book. Music and audio. Naruto's head glanced over his shoulder, ocean blue eyes emitting childlike genuineness. Of course I am. In one day, you're now able to hold onto your transformation for more than twice as long as the day before. The rate you're growing at is incredible, so why wouldn't I want to see how much further you can go? In Naruto's mind, Mirajan's training and abilities highly reminded him of his own. He had spent years in training trying to use Kurama's power, and was met with very little success. She and Elfman's use of takeover to draw on their respective inner souls, powers were highly reminiscent to that of the Jinchurikis. It's not that hard to keep a demonic hatchling under control, brat. I could have squashed the demons of this world right after being born and I doubt that even you would be taken over by a hatchling back when you were a kid. Are you complimenting me? Hearing the derisive snort of his partner, the shinobi internally chuckled, cracking a small smile on his features. I know what you mean, furball, but compared to me back then I could barely even hold your first transformation for more than 10 minutes without ending up in a hospital afterwards. If you look at it that way, I guess you can say that She-Devil's progress is quite remarkable from your standpoint. The Great Fox mused. Are you insulting me now? Hey, I've been meaning to ask you this, but what have you been drawing these past few days? Mirajan suddenly asked, drawing the blonde out of his inner thoughts. Her curious blue eyes looked over the significantly taller teen's shoulder as he drew foreign markings and intricate circles. Over the past week, she had noticed the Jinchuriki drawing in a notebook that he had procured from a local shop along with a pen. She couldn't make out the language he was writing in for the life of her or distinguish just what the drawings were supposed to symbolize. They're a surprise. Naruto grinned with a hint of mischief as he put the book into his red and black jacket's inner pocket. Mirajan frowned at the vague response as they finally reached their main training area. Her frown grew more prominent upon seeing a distinctive head of scarlet hair waiting for them. Urza Scarlet, the Titania, sat upon a log being used as a makeshift fireside bench with one leg crossed over the other while her hazel brown eyes drifted over towards the pair she had been waiting for. Over the past week, she had neither seen Fairy Tail's newest member nor her own rival. After asking Makarov, she learned that there was a rumor going around that the fairy's rookie was training the S-class mage in the Eastern Forest. She thought back to their heated but very brief spar back when he had first arrived and found herself perplexed. She did not consider herself to be vain, but as an S-class mage she knew that she was a recognizable icon among Fury. However, Someone who managed to best her in combat with his bare hands and a knife so abruptly arrived at Fairy Tail's doorstep, and no one had ever heard of him to this day. According to his words, he had been a freelance mercenary who maintained a low profile, but it just wasn't logically possible for someone of his caliber to remain concealed from the public eye for so long. Therefore, she had decided to confront the boy to learn more about his origins herself. It wasn't hard to find their training site considering the vast amount of magic she recognized as Myris being thrown about. Coming from Naruto, on the other hand, she felt nothing. She had not felt one speck of Etherano being used by the stranger, only adding to the shroud of mystery that surrounded him. This brought her to her second goal: challenging the blonde to a rematch in order to determine just what type of abilities he held, as the newcomer and her rival now stood in front of her. "Good morning, Naruto, Mira." "Morning, Urza," was Naruto's cheerful and immediate reply as he sat down on the log across from her. "Morning, Methia, Urza." Mira had almost regressed to her usual way of greeting her rival, but managed to catch her slip before smiling innocently while sitting beside her sparring partner. Although she was given a slight glare from Urza, Mira huffed and looked away, refusing to acknowledge the irritating woman's presence. Following her rival's example, Urza redirected her attention towards the amused blonde who watched the exchange from up close before noticing Urza's rather intense stare. "So is there something I can help you with?" Revisiting memories from the previous week of Naruto's first arrival, Urza remembered their previous bout and its rather humiliating result. Coughing into her metal gloves, she placed her hands on her S, adopting an act of casual amiability and impassiveness. "Ehem, I had heard you were training in the forest from the master, and I wanted to join you as I feel that I can learn much from a fellow S-class." "S-class? What's an? No way." Naruto had intended to ask what she meant by fellow S-class, before he had been abruptly cut off by Mirajan. Urza's eyes narrowed into a considerable glare, Myris matching it with an equal amount of intensity. From Mirajan's position, she was improving by large amounts every day, and having another person, especially someone like Urza, would impede on her training. It's not like she felt very possessive of her partner. No, that definitely wasn't it. I don't recall asking for your assistance, Mira. So I believe that is in your best interests to back away from the strongest female in the guild. If it were even possible. Mirajan's smile grew even sweeter as a darker aura wafted off of her, the amount of hostility and annoyance growing with each passing second. "And I don't seem to recall giving up that title to some 2-bit mage who managed to get lucky and squeak by the S-class exam," she replied just as evenly. "Shall we settle our accounts right here?" Both mages stood up from their seats before stepping away from the clearing seating area and into the open battle section. Opposing auras of scarlet and violet clashed against one another, scaring away nearly all wildlife. Streams of lightning collided in between the two opposing glares as the suffocating atmosphere was practically electric. The third person, who had concluded these two mixed as well as oil and water, had been all but forgotten and uncomfortably made his presence known in the clearing with an uneasy smile. I'd rather not have you two fight right here." The shinobi's first mistake was thinking that he could stop a conflict between two diehard rivals. The second and biggest mistake was involving himself. Two sets of eyes snapped towards him, each intending to demand he butt out before they suddenly widened, coming to a similar conclusion. Materializing a coat of light around herself, Urza donned a black winged armor set and pointed the tip of her two-handed blade directly at Naruto's chest, giving a strange sense of déjà vu to the shinobi. "Very well, we will both battle against you as a way to end our conflict." "Wait, what?" Surrounded in a purple storm of magical power, Mirajan emerged, transformed into her Satan soul form, upraised hair, elongated claws, and a dangerous grin bundled all in one. "And the winner gets the right to train with you. Kurama, little help here please. As the superior being, I will allow this challenge to satiate my boredom." "Really? What? I'll give you some tips if you're that scared. For example, dodge right now. Bastard fox. Naruto outwardly shouted, right as Mira and Urza both began their attack. The two S-class mages struck downwards with a fist and a sword, splitting the earth apart with dangerous force. The blonde dimension traveler nimbly avoided the conjoined attack on his person by leaping backwards while withdrawing his sketchbook from within his coat. Flipping to his most recent section of the book, he tore out a few pages right as he jumped over Urza's forward thrust. The dignified knight's step-in was so strong that it had taken her from nearly 10 feet away to directly in front of him with a blade ready to pierce through him. Oh, she's not bad, Kurama commented from within his cell. I'd estimate she'd be a top-tier samurai of the Iron Country. Naruto's facial features mirrored his inner displeasure as his body moved as if automatically. You're really enjoying this, aren't you? Urza's eyes widened as the shinobi, with the grace of a cat, jumped off of her sword like a springboard, using 2 feet to accurately land on the blade's hilt. Naruto flipped forwards over her head while in midair, where he was met by Miragen, whose fist was enveloped in a sphere of demonic energy. Flexing her clawed fingers, she did a large, sweeping slash that launched 5 wide claw-shaped waves of magic. Kurama devilishly grinned, revealing the rows of razor-sharp elongated fangs that could pierce through even the toughest metals with ease. Of course not. I'm just very interested in this world's magic. The White One's manipulation of it is also quite interesting. Not even bothering to hide his annoyance, the shinobi held out one of the pages he tore out in a defensive manner against the oncoming slashes of magic power. Diaresis, what's he thinking? There's no way a piece of paper can block my attack. Diaresis. Miragen's eyes momentarily widened as the words the ocean blue-eyed teen spoke moments ago rang in her mind. To her surprise and horror, a practically unnoticeable void the size of a pin needle began to draw in and absorb her attack, sucking in each individual magic claw until there was nothing left. A new symbol in black ink appeared on the piece of paper wielded by the eccentric ninja. Surprised? He asked as he landed safely on the ground, his insufferable grin annoying her greatly. Urza stared in awe at the seemingly normal piece of paper that somehow absorbed an attack that would have given even her some damage. She had never witnessed anything similar to that form of magic, believing it to be something akin to runes. The longer this battle progresses, the more uncertain I become of our combined chances. She thought, eyeing Miragen as the grip on her sword tightened. Miragen, however, remained indifferent, knowing that giving the blonde a reaction would only fuel his amusement. The boy trumped even her as a sadist when it came to teasing. When it comes to you, I guess I shouldn't be, she neutrally responded, maintaining her composure. Also, do you think that thing can take another one of those? Myra's hands were enveloped in a purple glow once more, her clawed, demonic hands becoming 2 times more intimidating. Returning back to reality with the questions of her rival, Urza subtly moved behind the shinobi's line of sight in preparation for an attack from the rear. Naruto's confident grin widened further in response to Miragen's threat as he held up his remaining 2 pages that he had torn out from earlier, one held in between each of his index and middle fingers. Diaresis, I've got more than one trick up my sleeve, you know. If I were you, I'd be more worried at the fact that a total newbie is managing to school his seniors in their own areas of expertise. Quote. The clearing became dead silent. Both of their prides as S-class mages so brazenly insulted, Miragen and Urza discarded their original strategy of feeling out the blonde's potential moves to develop a strategy to counter them. Their eyes darkened considerably while their magical power output skyrocketed as their goal became one in the same. Beat him down. Dark, stormy whirlwinds surrounded the 2 rivals as they gathered everything they had towards thrashing the pest in front of them. Urza's black wing armor and sword glowed with a scarlet hue as the swordswoman sharpened her blade to its very limit. The weapon's sharpness was enhanced by the sun as the metal reflected the rays of light, giving it a blinding glint. Bringing her hands close together, a purple sphere of magic materialized within Mirajan's palms, growing larger with each passing second. The orb of energy glowed a malevolent violet as a spiraling storm of magic was contained into a smaller shape that continued to expand in order to hold the sheer amount of magic within it. Practically dumping a gallon of fuel onto the metaphorical fire, Naruto's grin widened even further as he made a "come on" motion with his hands, adding the last straw that broke the camel's back. Soul extinction. Moon flash. A nigh unstoppable torrent of demonic energy magnified in waves rushed towards the unperturbed ninja from the front while a flying cross-shaped slash approached from the rear. At that moment, two silver chains with a golden hue burst from his upper back before coiling themselves around each arm with movements as fluid as two snakes. The chains suddenly began to warble and melt, becoming an amorphous liquid substance that coated Naruto's arms in their entirety until solidifying into silverish gold segmented sections of armor. The Uzumaki's left and right shoulders down to his hands were surrounded in the adamantine chains until not a single space was left uncovered. With his newly acquired armor sleeves, he held his arms out to each side, intercepting both the wave of demonic energy and the sword slashes with his hands. The two attacks slammed against his armored hands, one intending to pulverize his bones while the other intended to slash him apart. Firearms and weapons. A loud screeching sound reverberated across the forest with magic grinding against metal, neither of the two giving an inch against the other. The cacophonous noise was utterly deafening as the two S-class girls continued to fuel their attacks against the whiskered teen who had not given in against their combined effort. Urza and Mirajan's attacks pushed against him with all of their might, but it was all for naught. Their expressions changed to that of shock as both Soul Extinction and Moon Flash were obliterated mere seconds later. As the smoke cleared, Naruto's hands surrounded in chains were clenched, indicating that he had crushed both of the attacks with seemingly minimal effort. For Mirajan, this was the first time that she had witnessed Naruto using the chains for something other than chasing and capturing enemies. She glared at the whiskered teen whose metal-covered hands remained only slightly burnt from her strongest attack. For Urza, this was the introduction of something completely new. In their initial spar, the blonde had wielded a small knife whose material managed to cut through her steel swords like butter. She first believed that he had concealed the weapon in his sleeve, but that did not appear to be the case now. Eyeing the new armor surrounding his sleeves, she concluded that the rookie's abilities allowed him to control those strange chains as if it was second nature to him, while also being able to manipulate their shape to nearly anything he desired. Taking advantage of their flabbergasted state of mind, dozens of chains burst from the ground beneath the S-class mages, seizing their legs, hands, waist, and even neck for good measure. "It's my win," Naruto declared as the armor around his arms reverted back into chains and disappeared into his body. Mirajan sighed and undid her takeover, knowing that once she was captured there was no way of escape. After all, these chains were the reason why their current record was 9-0. "I give up," she readily conceded. Urza, on the other hand, continued to struggle, even refusing to release her sword that still remained in her grip. "Not yet. I can still fight," she argued as she continued to wrestle against the chains. "Hold on her." As the chains set Mirajan down, the S-class mage rubbed her wrists before staring at her rival's current position. She tilted her head to the side before a devilish smile stretched across her lips. Naruto stood in front of a still entangled Urza with Mira behind him, arms crossed over his chest and a weary expression marking his features. He didn't know how long it would take for Urza to give up, as she was almost as stubborn as him. "I really wish she'd just give up here. It's not like she's losing anything." "Bah, don't be such a downer," Kurama voiced with a tint of amusement laced in his tone. "I'm more eager to see just how long she'll hold out before she breaks." "What did you say just now?" "Hey, Naruto." Glancing behind him to find the source of the sweet-sounding voice, Naruto's ocean blue eyes met a smiling Mirajan whose gaze was firmly fixated on her struggling rival, who had not bothered to listen in on their conversation. I can make her give up. Just make me a stick with those chains of yours. What are you going to do? Naruto questioned, eyeing Mira warily. Persuade her, was her almost immediate and overly cheerful reply. Against his better judgment, the ninja from another world nervously smiled before complying. He clapped his hands together before pulling them apart, creating a pole roughly a meter in length and 4 to 5 centimeters in width. Martial arts films. Miragen grabbed the item, chirping a thanks and moving to stand directly in front of Urza. This is gonna be entertaining. Okay. You wanna tell me what's going on, since you seem to know more about this situation than I do? Naruto could practically see the fox's grin after asking his question despite not being face to face with his partner. I want you to think long and hard about those books that toad of a teacher had you proofread and the situation in front of you. Naruto blinked once. He blinked twice. He blinked a third time before his jaw suddenly dropped, almost hitting the ground. His eyes inspected the chains protruding from the ground and realized the way they were holding Urza was rather provocative. Understanding slammed into the shinobi like a truck as he realized what Miragen intended to do, but it was way too late to stop her. Urza momentarily ceased her struggling upon noticing her rival's presence directly beneath her. She still donned her black wing armor, but Miragen's takeover was nowhere to be seen. Instead, Myra's lips were upturned in a cheerful smile while her demeanor reflected that of someone who hadn't lost. It looks like I am the victor through forfeit, Urza confidently stated, smirking victoriously in the face of her rival. Rather than get offended or annoyed by her declaration, Myra's smile only grew. Actually, you haven't actually won, as the bet was to see who could beat Naruto. Besides, if anything, you're the loser here. Urza's expression shifted to that of confusion before she suddenly gasped when she felt something touch her. Her hazel brown eyes followed the source to a rod currently being held by Mira, who had pushed the chains wrapped around her legs considerably higher. The constrictions previously securing her at the middle of her legs had been pushed upwards much too close to her lower half. The knight could feel the cold metal dig into her flesh as her face began to burn brightly. What do you think you're doing, you harlot? With one hand adjusting the positions of the chains, Miragen bit down on the index of her other while her eyes grew half-lidded. Harlot. That's quite rude. If anything, that name suits you a lot more. What did you say? Miragen returned Urza's previously confident smirk with one of her own as Urza felt chills run down her spine seeing the gleam in her sapphire orbs. The rod traveled higher and higher along the side of her leg as Urza felt her composure begin to waver. After all, I bet you read about this situation all the time in those books of yours. And just like that, all color left Urza's face while her voice grew hoarse. Why you know about my books. Miragen stepped even closer to the scarlet-haired warrior, their bodies practically pressed together, and brought her mouth directly next to her ear. Of course I know. I've had dirt on you for ages, Urza. Urza felt her face burn like never before as her cheeks grew redder with each passing second. Myra's hand softly caressed her cheek before sliding downwards, trailing down the nape of her neck towards the silver-edged plate that covered very little. I won't tell anyone as long as you admit that you lost. Miragen continued to almost lovingly whisper. And if you admit that I'm the strongest woman in the guild. And never. Urza defiantly answered, shuddering under Myra's touch. Then, Myra's sweet smile became even more excited as the snow-haired girl practically pressed the rod to Urza's crotch. You leave me no choice. Before it could escalate any further, both the chains and rod being used by Mira and Urza vanished. With nothing constraining her anymore, Urza suddenly yelped as she toppled over onto an equally surprised Miragen. The Titania's face was pressed directly into her rival's chest while Miragen lied on her back with her rival on top. She lifted her head up to look behind her while still on the ground and frowned in annoyance at the upside-down blonde. What the hell, Naruto? I was finally about to chase her away. She noticed a distinct dust of red on Naruto's whiskered cheeks as he stared disapprovingly with his arms crossed over his chest. Listen, although you seem to be having a blast molesting Urza. Naruto trailed off, eyeing Urza's utterly embarrassed disposition as she hurriedly climbed back to her feet while regaining a very large distance away from the woman. I'd really rather not be an accomplice to. Ho. Mirajan teasingly grinned, leaning on her side while resting her cheek in the palm of her hand, fully knowing that the tables had turned. Then why didn't you stop me sooner, pervy-sensei? Naruto let out a cry of pain as he felt a metaphorical lightning bolt pierce through his heart. He clasped the left side of his chest at getting called out before sputtering back a response. Oh please. I was shocked. Okay. It's not every day you see a girl do that kind of stuff to another girl, you know. The image of Mirajan lewdly touching Urza seemed like a scene straight out of the Ika Ika series his late godfather was infamous for. Not many knew that Naruto had been responsible for reading over the entirety of Jiraiya's work, making sure there were no grammatical errors. After all, the pervert had forced him to do so, stating it was a form of payment for the trip. After reading through all 3 Ika Ika installments, the Jinchuriki could safely say his late teacher had planted the seeds of a closet pervert and corrupted him. Besides, you guys are so unfair, challenging me when I don't get anything in return at all. Since I won, I want you guys to answer some questions I've had for a while, deal? Mirajan burst into a fit of laughter as she hugged the sides of her black tank top before standing back to her feet. Whatever you say, pervy-sensei. Damn it. I'm not Ero Sennin. I'm not that guy. I'm not. Naruto internally cried. Keep telling yourself that, pervy-sensei. Feeling heavy-hearted at the fact he had been branded with the same pet name as his godfather, Naruto decided to move things along and learn more about Fury. I've been wondering this for a while since Urza said it multiple times. Naruto began drawing the aforementioned scarlet-haired girl's attention. But what is an S-class mage? You guys keep calling me that. Mirajan and Urza both owlishly blinked, giving each other estranged glances before redirecting their focus on Naruto. Diaresis, you don't know what an S-class mage is? Mirajan tentatively asked. The shinobi shook his head in a negatory manner. Diaresis, but aren't you an S-class mage? Urza confusedly questioned. Diaresis again? What is that? Diaresis. Naruto's sweat dropped. Mira and Urza both felt chills, realizing that Naruto wasn't kidding. An S-class mage is a title given to only the strongest wizards. Urza began, starting with a brief description. Strength, intellect, dexterity, and even luck are all merits that are judged during Fairy Tail's S-class promotion trials. Seeing Naruto's confusion, Mirajan decided to expound on Urza's summary. Every year, the master chooses a group of candidates to participate in the S-class promotion exams that take place on the guild's island, Tenryjima. Naruto let out an ah of understanding as he started to realize just how similar Fury was to his old world. In other words, these promotion trials are like our Chunin exams. In addition to prestige, S-class wizards are also granted the privilege of undertaking S-class requests that give greater rewards than normal jobs, but they are far more dangerous. Urza spoke, resuming her explanation. So does that mean S-class is the highest rank there is? The silver and scarlet-haired wizards exchanged a look with one another before shaking their heads. Diaresis, although it's not really a rank open to everyone, there's one last rank that only the greatest wizards on the continent can reach. Urza responded. Diaresis, the 10 Wizard Saints, is an organization of the 10 strongest wizards in Fury, and they even hold some influence over the country's political matters. Diaresis. Diaresis, the top 10 strongest wizards on the continent, huh? The shinobi murmured to himself. Diaresis Master Makarov is also one of the 10 Wizard Saints. Diaresis. Mirajan added. Diaresis also, I've been meaning to ask this, but where exactly did you come from, Naruto? I thought someone like you would have already become S-class by now. Diaresis. Urza nodded in her head in agreement, directing a questioning gaze towards the blonde in question. The Uzumaki uneasily smiled, shifting nervously in the face of two rather intense stares. Diaresis, well, where I come from we do have ranks like you guys, but we just called them different things, you know. Diaresis. The two rivals' unsettled expressions eased up a bit upon hearing the whiskered boy's explanation, concluding that there were some remote regions that did have different standards than Fury. Only difference is exams basically tell you to kill everyone or somehow survive until the end to pass. So what rank were you then? Naruto blinked at the sudden question, turning to Mira, who had asked the question. What rank did you formerly possess? Urza asked, repeating the question. Surely you were of high rankings. Although it could hardly be called accurate, his current and official rank was rather embarrassing, as the Jinchuriki sheepishly chuckled while averting his gaze. Well, back in my village, I'm actually considered the lowest rank, not counting academy students who are all 9 to 11 years old. Urza and Mirajan's facial features paled considerably, their minds going blank and failing to register what they had just heard. You've gotta be joking. Mira tonelessly spoke. Sadly, I'm not. Naruto embarrassedly chuckled. So you mean to say that there are even 10-year-olds who are as capable as you? Urza hollowly questioned. Oh, no, of course not. The whiskered Jinchuriki immediately interjected, waving his hands in an attempt to clear away the confusion. Seeing Mira and Urza relax, albeit slightly, the ninja from another world decided to elaborate further. I took the promotion exam when I was 13, but there were complications. What do you mean by complications? Mira curiously asked. Naruto scratched the side of his cheek, deliberating the best way to explain it both concisely and with detail. Long story short, my village was attacked during the exam, my friends were hurt, and at the end of it our leader died in the invasion. The two wizards' eyes widened before their owners simultaneously lowered their heads in an apology. Sorry, I didn't mean to pry too much. Mira apologized. I as well, Urza supplemented. Waving his hands in a disregarding manner, Naruto gave an eye smile to the two. Don't worry about it, it's all in the past. Anyway, because of that attack, I had to leave the village to train, and I never really had the time to take a promotion exam after that for years. But if that's the case, then I'm sure you'll pass the S-class promotion trials this year. Urza had been the one to suddenly speak up, slightly surprising both Naruto and Mirajan. The silver-haired mage looked towards her training partner and nodded as well, wholly agreeing with Urza's declaration. Her eyes suddenly lit up as an idea came to mind. Hey, I have an idea. Since you can't take on S-class quests at the moment, I'll take you on one with me so that I can show you what it's like. The Titania's gaze snapped towards her rival in shock, as she had the same idea mere seconds ago. Wait a minute. Okay. Sure. Naruto answered with a grin. I could use the reward money, too. Mirajan directed a sideways smirk towards Urza, who clenched her fist in annoyance. Perfect. Then how about we meet up later at the Guildhall? I'll clean up here. Naruto blinked, rather surprised at the offer to clean up their training area. Although there wasn't a huge mess, there was still a makeshift fire pit with burnt lumber and scattered rocks, along with a wooden training dummy made reusing a fallen tree. Seeing Mirajan nod her head in affirmation, Naruto smiled in thanks, nodding his head in gratitude before taking off. Mira maintained a sweet, bubbly smile as she waved him off, watching his departing back in the distance. Now that we're by ourselves, I'd like you to know that I'd appreciate it if you could stop trying to steal my training partner. She casually spoke to the girl beside her. Although Mirajan had witnessed Naruto create clones on numerous occasions, she doubted Urza possessed the same knowledge, which is why she decided to take advantage of that fact. Urza crossed her arms over her plate, a neutral expression marking her features. Oh, please. I'm sure Naruto would be more than willing to assist me in my own training. What reason could you possibly have to treat him like he's yours? A look of annoyance crossed the takeover mage's countenance. Just the thought of Urza creating the gap annoyed her enough, but the thought of Naruto being alone with her rival Urza made things a little bit more than uncomfortable. It was quieter than mouse but louder than a forest breeze. She watched as the charismatic, whiskered boy became smaller and smaller in the distance before murmuring words heard by herself and herself alone. Because it was a promise. She childishly whispered. Fairy Tale Guildhall. Naruto had just arrived to the Fairy Tale Guildhall, pushing aside its wooden doors and entering a jovial morning atmosphere. As he took the time to observe his surroundings, he noticed that a few members had already entered early. Makarov was stationed at his usual position of the bar's countertop, sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed in either thought or rest. The older men he saw at the cemetery before, Mikao and Wakaba, were drinking with a girl around his age despite it still being early in the day. Over by a wall lined with sheets of paper, the ninja assumed that was where you found job requests. A man with chin-length black hair and tribal wear stared intently at each paper as if entranced. Martial arts films. A couple tables away, a very bulky, roundish man used a brush and palette to create a portrait, carefully measuring each stroke with an attentive eye. There wasn't that much activity considering it was pretty early in the morning, but there were still a good amount of mages already ready to begin their days. Natsu was a prime example as he ran up towards the blonde along with a flying happy. Hey Naruto, what are you doing here so early? He excitedly asked. I'm actually waiting on Mira to get here. Natsu adopted a look of confusion, giving a strange glance to Happy, who returned the gesture. Why are you waiting for Mira to get here? Aren't you scared of her? This time it was Naruto's turn to be confused. Why would I be scared of her? Besides, she said she's going to take me on an S-class job to see what it's like. Natsu's expression was that of shock as his jaw nearly hit the ground. What? The shinobi's confused look was still apparent as he rubbed the back of his neck uncomfortably in the face of Natsu's intensive stare. Diaresis, is there something wrong with that? Natsu recovered from his initial shock, fumbling with his response. Diaresis, well, not really, since S-class mages can take non-S-class mages with them, but still, you just joined a couple weeks ago. They're supposed to be really dangerous too. Naruto gave an eye smile to the fire dragon slayer before ruffling his hair in an amused manner. Diaresis, don't worry about it. I'm plenty strong. Diaresis, but, Diaresis, relax, Flamebrain. Diaresis Gray spoke up, entering their conversation as he walked through the entrance's doors. The Ice Make Wizard's attitude was as cool as always. In a way, it reminded the whiskered teen of how his former friend could have turned out if it weren't for the massacre of his family. Natsu's mood immediately soured with the exhibitionist's arrival, while Naruto and Happy gave a small wave to the composed mage. Welcome back, Gray. Happy greeted with his paw in the air. The ice wizard gave a nod towards the flying feline before returning back to his original thought. Diaresis, there aren't any members of our guild who can't take care of themselves. Diaresis Gray stated as if it were fact. His navy blue eyes stared directly into Natsu's onyx ones. Besides, I'm sure Mira knows what she's doing. Haven't you noticed how much she's changed since she started practicing again with Naruto? Naruto's eyebrow slightly rose at that. Wait, how did he know? Oh right, Urza. Natsu grumbled and, I guess, to himself, knowing his rival held a pretty strong argument. But still, be careful, Naruto. The Dimension Traveler grinned reassuringly, projecting an air of genuineness. Relax, I can take care of anything this job throws at me. Oh, I'm not talking about the job. Natsu replied, shivering slightly. I'm talking about Mira. Mira. Natsu nodded, his facial expression reliving a past trauma of sorts, reflecting nothing but fear as his arms and legs trembled. When I was younger, she told me that if I wasn't careful around her, she'd cook me up and eat me. A bead of sweat rolled down the back of Naruto's head, realizing Mira must have scarred the poor boy a lot when he was younger. Natsu, I'm sure that's not true. He deadpanned. She actually said she would eat him raw like a fish. Happy enthusiastically supplied. At that moment, the Dragon Slayer and his partner both felt a dainty hand grab onto their skulls with a vice grip as they each felt a shiver travel up their spines. Natsu. Happy. An unmistakable voice sang out from behind them as the two culprits squeaked in fear. Are you two spreading rumors about me? Naruto watched on, eyes full of pity for the fire wizard and his blue companion. He slightly sweat-dropped seeing Gray subtly move behind him as if to use him as a shield against Mira. At least he's good at using his head. No. Of course we weren't. Natsu hurriedly responded, his petrified gaze snapping towards his partner. Right. Happy. The blue cat answered, eyes wide with fear and panic. Miragen loosened her hold on their heads, allowing them to escape and scramble away. The infamous pair burst past Team Shadowgear as they entered their guild hall, running as far away as possible. While Gray took the opportunity to slink away and the shinobi watched the duo's retreating backs, Miragen dusted off her hands before spinning on her heel to head up to Fairy Tail's second floor. After Naruto had left, she had made a quick stop by her home to change into a better set of clothing that could be worn on missions. Although her form-fitting tank top and shorts were easy to move in an ideal or for fighting, they weren't very presentable when taking on jobs. Her current attire consisted of a loose-fitting pair of jeans and a comfortable navy blue t-shirt that hugged her form nicely. I'll go grab a job, so just wait here. She received a nod and a thumbs up from her tag along as she strode over towards the staircase leading upwards. Before she could climb the first step, the takeover mage heard the intentional cough of Makarov behind her. The silver-haired teen glanced over her shoulder to meet Makarov's worried gaze that watched over her intently. You don't need to say anything, master. I'll be fine. She softly smiled. Makarov's concerned expression remained but eased slightly, seeing the confident light return to his precious child's eyes. Miragen ascended up the revered staircase that only a select few had the right of climbing. Every time she took a step, she remembered a different trial that she had to face and overcome during her promotions exam. The blood, the sweat, and the tears that she shed were all a part of her efforts to reach this point, and she would never take them lightly. Reaching the top of the steps, she moved towards the S-Class job request bulletin that displayed a single job in comparison to the board downstairs that held a plethora. Investigate the disappearance of a town's women, reward 20 million jewels. Mira read aloud as she ripped the sheet off the board. Are you seriously going to take that request? A voice suddenly questioned from behind. Miragen turned around to see Laxus sprawled out on the upper level's couch with his hands resting behind his head, eyes shut, and headphones blasting away. The grandson of the master was a wizard of exceptional talent and strength who had more than proved his rank as S-Class. I thought you would have quit by now after seeing how pitiful your magic power was a few weeks ago. In addition to his impressive strength, Laxus was also very arrogant and condescending. He was a boastful and boorish individual who took too much pride in his status as an S-Class and lorded it over the rest of the Fairy Tail Guild. Even during the few scarce encounters she had with the grandson of the third master, she could always see a resentful gleam in his eyes. It wasn't directed solely towards her, but was instead directed towards everyone other than his personal followers. It amazed Miragen by just how different two blood-related individuals could be as she adopted an expression of indifference. If that's all you have to say, then I'm leaving Laxus. Laxus derisively snorted as he sat up and swung his legs over the couch. He rested his cheek in the palm of his hand that propped itself up on the S-Class wizard's leg while a haughty smirk stretched across his features, threatening to split his lightning bolt-shaped scar in two. Oh, yeah, I heard you're bringing the greenhorn with you. Do me a favor and try not to lose the new guy too. It won't do for the guild's reputation if we somehow manage to lose our newbies like flies. Miragen's jaw tightened while her fists balled themselves tightly. Over the years, Laxus had grown to become increasingly more unbearable, with a large number of the guild wishing for him to get taken down a peg. Before she could answer with a harsh retort, she suddenly stopped and smiled as an even better idea came to mind. "I wouldn't worry about us if I were you," she evenly responded with an innocent smile. "I'd be more worried about your precious S-class reputation, because I'd bet a good amount of jewels that Naruto far surpasses you." Her provocation earned a strong rise out of the Drayar as a dark undertone reflected itself within his coal-black eyes. The hairs on the back of his neck began to rise while a few sparks of electricity burst off his body. "Diaresis, are you saying some rookie who joined less than a month ago could beat me?" "Diaresis?" he dangerously questioned. Myra's demure smile only furthered as she walked back towards the steps to the lower floor. Her hands were clasped behind her back while her posture was of picturesque blamelessness. With a glance over her shoulder, she hammered in the final nail. "Diaresis, oh, would you look at that? You actually can hear other people over the sound of your own voice." "Diaresis." Mirajan didn't bother to turn around as she descended back down, as she could practically feel Laxus seething and glaring holes into her back. A small, almost invisible frown marred her lips as the conceited S-class wizards grated on her psyche. Was she really ready for this? While she didn't doubt Naruto could handle himself, she also felt fear, as she knew firsthand just how fast S-class jobs could take a turn for the worst. When she reached the bottom of the stairs, she found her training partner waiting for her nearby, talking to the guild's infamous heavy drinker, Kana. "Diaresis, come on. Just take one sip. Don't be such a stick in the mud." "Diaresis," she loudly bemoaned, practically shoving a mug of alcohol into the shinobi's face. Mirajan sighed to herself, already used to Kana's antics of intoxicating new members just to test whether they stood on the same abnormal alcohol tolerance level as the card mage. Naruto initially had come to the bar to strike up a conversation with Makarov before being intercepted by Kana, who had stopped him to Diaresis offer Diaresis a drink. "Diaresis, Kana, I'm fine really," he replied with a bead of sweat rolling down the back of his head. A mischievous glint gleamed in her amber eyes while a drunken blush adorned her nose and cheeks. "Diaresis, ho hick. What's the matter? Hick. Ya chicken." "Diaresis." Kana slung an arm over the ocean-eyed teen's neck, and in her inebriated state she yanked his face much closer to her barely concealed cleavage. Naruto, face lightly burning red yet composed, internally lamented over the fact that he did not have much experience dealing with drunks. Sure, there was his former teacher, but a good punch to the face usually sobered him up. Unfortunately, the shinobi doubted such a method would be accepted here, especially with someone like Kana. Thankfully, Mirajan came to his rescue as she appeared by his side and tugged him away while directing a frown towards Kana as she departed. Kana's hazy gaze thickened, gaining a sultry undertone to it with a hint of jealousy. "Ho, you sure are bold, Mira hick. Already making the newbie yours to play with hick." She drunkenly slurred aloud as the duo was no longer within earshot and already out the guild's front doors. The card mage's boozy eyes eventually wandered back towards her empty cup, noting it was empty. "Someone refill my damn cup already." Train ride to Marigold Town. Despite having observed the scenery once on his way into Magnolia, Naruto still found himself in awe at just how beautiful the passing landscape truly was. Clean rivers flowed alongside the train into wide lakes, verdant hills and forests dotted the mountainside, providing homes for hundreds of creatures. It was a land unmarred by conflict. Vivid images of the war-torn battlefields, barren wastelands, and destroyed coastlines were still fresh on the young ninja's mind as he shook his head to clear away the nightmarish days. Sitting across from him, Mirajan occasionally snuck glances towards the blonde who went back to drawing in his pocketbook. The Uzumaki had not asked any questions regarding their mission and had been told only the basic info she had given him before they left. It made her rather anxious as she wondered if the whiskered boy was also nervous. She talked big in front of Laxus since she knew it would annoy the lightning wizard, but she truthfully had no idea whether or not Naruto could handle an S-class job. Sure, he was undefeated in their training matches and had even beaten both her and Urza at the same time, but an S-class job was the real deal. Mira gave him a small, nervous glance once more, except this time she found his inquisitive stare being returned right back at her. Laxus's words rang out once more, striking the bell of unease within her chest. What's the matter? You've been anxious since we left? Naruto curiously asked. Although he wasn't as nearly skilled at detecting emotions without using Kurama's chakra mode, the shinobi could still tell that there was something bothering Miragen, given by the number of nervous movements she kept making along with the number of times she kept glancing at him when she thought he didn't notice. Slightly unsettled at being unexpectedly caught, the eldest Strauss tried to play off her worries as figments of her companion's imagination. I was just a bit surprised is all, she explained, shifting her sights towards the window. I mean, aren't you nervous about the job? You haven't asked anything about it. Not really, he answered, his hand fluidly moving the pencil along the pocketbook. The job flyer only says the reward and where to go, so I figured I'd get the job's important details from the person who made the request. Naruto paused to observe his work. At the moment, he was recreating the seal he used against Miragen in training, making sure it was perfect to the last stroke. It wasn't very practical to use small pieces of paper in actual situations, but he figured it would be more important to learn and memorize the seal first before crossing that bridge. He suddenly smiled as an idea came to him. Actually, I do have a question. Really? Mira responded with a hint of surprise underlying her tone. What is it? Did you actually eat kids when you were younger? Miragen's face slowly turned a bright shade of red as Naruto's words sank in. In a combination of both embarrassment and anger, she stood up to her feet, looming over Naruto despite the latter being 5 to 6 inches shorter while sitting down. That's a lie and you know it. I only said that to Natsu because he wouldn't stop challenging me to fights all the time. The Strauss's chest rose up and down, taking in air after having to abruptly shout. The whiskered mischief maker snickered in amusement at his companion's reaction. You look more relaxed now. We haven't even started the job yet, so just take it easy, you know. His ocean eyes had already returned to the notebook in his lap as he continued to practice his seal writing. Miragen's lips frowned in a sulking manner, but she couldn't argue with the blonde's logic. She eventually shifted her attention towards the book that Naruto had been writing in ever since they boarded the train. The shinobi felt the cushion beneath him shift with the addition of more weight as Miragen moved to sit next to him rather than across. Her curious gaze wandered over his notebook, trying to make sense of the foreign shapes and characters. That reminds me, what exactly do those symbols mean? I remember you were drawing those back in the forest too. They're called seals, Naruto answered, flicking the pencil he was drawing with around his thumb with a grin. Miragen, on the other hand, was left with a more or less confused impression. Seals, the very word itself seemed like a foreign concept. Despite the brash personality she once retained years ago, she had still been considered quite knowledgeable on the numerous types of magic used by wizards. Yet in the years of her tenure as an S-class wizard, not once had she heard or seen a magic remotely similar to what Naruto used. Noticing her clearly complex countenance, Naruto flipped his book's pages closer towards the front of his pocketbook in order to provide a more detailed explanation. He held the book up, displaying 2 pages side by side. Do you see anything out of the ordinary with these? Scanning over both pages, she noticed a clear difference in the way one page contained more symbols than the other. Although they're called seals, sealing things away isn't their only use. They can be used for a lot of different things like makeshift bombs, power sealers, or in the more advanced cases. Miragen's eyes suddenly lit up, recollecting a certain memory that happened not too long ago while drowning out the blue-eyed boy's voice. It was when the eccentric teen had shown up outside her home asking her to take him grocery shopping. He handed her a piece of paper that didn't make sense to her then, unlike it did now. Barriers, teleportation, or even gravity manipulation. Mirajan guessed, surprising the otherworldly ninja. Yeah, I've actually been working on that one for the past week. How'd you know that? I remember it was on your list of reminds that you accidentally showed me before we went shopping. Quick question though. Naruto felt a sudden chill run up his spine in the face of Myra's all too bright smile. Who exactly were you planning to test these seals on? A few thoughts had crossed Myra's mind almost immediately after realizing just how often the blonde worked on those seals of his and after he had explained their potential uses. The first was the trick behind his teleportation ability. When they had teleported to Natsu and Lizana's first home, she saw an insignia with similar characters nearby on a rock. The second was his use of seals and his guinea pig for them. He already used one in their training fight with Urza, so who was to say he wouldn't use them again? Naruto averted his gaze, innocently whistled while a bead of sweat ran down the back of his head. His blue eyes peeked to the side, glancing to see if Mira had stopped staring. She hadn't. Come on, Mira, it's equivalent exchange. We're both training, so it only makes sense that I try out new things, you know. Her sapphire eyes remained unyielding and unamused as they stared into his. If you want, I can just practice on my own clones, no big deal. There was still no change. You want me to use these on Urza, don't you?